don't know how to start this.
I think that it's reasonable to start by suggesting that neither of us are certified experts.
Listen, we've watched online movies multiple times. I don't know about you, but I know I have.
Oh,
I have played video games. I have read extended, like, fucking Wikipedia files. All right, because
mm-hmm.
apparently that's one of the better ways to get information on the extended universe. And I've actually read a couple of novelizations, but that was back in like middle school, so like I don't remember too much of it. Plus, Disney was just like, "Oh yeah, by the way, not canon anymore. Sucks to be you." Moving
Well,
on.
I think, I mean, right. Like, if memory serves, when they like kind of soft backpedaled because of how horrible the reception for that was, um, it just kind of reaffirms that you can't walk into Star Wars feeling like an expert entirely because there's so much out there and there are people who've been doing this for so long that like I can remember a guy when I was really young who had like totes, plural totes full of like fictionalization, extended lore content from like the old books. And he'd talk about it all the time, right? He'd talk about stars all the time. He loved this stuff. And he was like, it's one of the hardest things for me to move whenever I move because it's like taking up an entire corner of my garage. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
right, like you can't walk into this expecting to know everything. I won't speak for both of us. I will say that if I get something wrong, I am more than
Oh,
willing to accept that I am wrong
I am
and to have
absolutely gonna
somebody
take you as wrong.
politely say, "Hey, dude, here's this thing you said that was slightly wrong," and then to give me a source, because that's like productive and not,
Oh yeah.
internet redditing where people just kind of yell at
Well,
you.
so there's only so much you can get from like Wikipedia, which of course is where a lot of my research has gone into because it's like one of the only places that has consolidated places consolidated places of information on the internet that
Mm-hmm.
isn't like Screen Rant, which
Yeah.
unfortunately I do have up as one of my things to reference. It's not IGN. It's not these really obscure. They talk out their ass for you know 8 paragraphs before they get to the title of the title of the article.
Yeah.
But even then, that's truncated. So you don't get the full story unless you go through and you read every movie, you watch every, or you play every game, you read every book, you watch every movie, you watch every cutscene. You talk to George Lucas about what he meant when he went here and what he said here. There's just too much. This is 40, almost 50 years of history where it wasn't just one man, George Lucas, making stuff, making movies. This is hundreds of thousands of people making their own canon and just assimilating it together into one relatively like linear story, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just never get to the bottom of it. But you know what? This podcast is just talking about two guys and their very heavily opinionated opinions, if
Sometimes
one were to say,
controversial.
about what is canon, what is not, and why some people are wrong. We are the vocal minority.
We're
I'm
gonna throw the
sorry.
gauntlet.
Absolute with each other sometimes.
Of course. I mean, that's how we started this, right? It was be like, hey, you said something that's gonna put me on a 3 hour long tirade. Maybe we should let's
Talk
agree
about this
to
off hours so we're not wasting our
the
employers'
company
money.
time. um, all right. Well, no. What better subject to start this highly controversial warning about our controversial opinions than lightsaber colors?
Absolutely. I think that's just you brought it up and I think it's an amazing place to start because it's one that is both open to interpretation but also has a lot of significance behind it and a lot of like what people consider canon. Obviously,
Yeah.
again, what's canon and what is not fluctuates with Walt Disney's whim, so it's hard to say what exactly is where. But I think it's such an easy intro to talking about this that isn't quite controversial, that has a lot of history and information behind it that we can research and we can look into and actually be factual on instead of just spouting our opinions for 2 hours, like whatever.
Right. We'll get to that part once we get
That's
over
episode 2.
the right. No, really. Like lightsabers are one of the most integral, like flagship components, recognizable components of the Star Wars franchise. Like lightsabers
Absolutely.
draw the eye. Lightsabers tell you who is the important part of the story. Lightsabers are an expression of character. They're symbols in integral parts of the movie for hope and for the lack thereof. And like you said earlier, there's a lot of like pre-established history that goes into this stuff. Lightsabers are like the coolest thing to talk about when you're a kid, and when you start looking at
Oh, yeah.
all the reasons why things are the way they are, you find a lot of really cool stuff. You find a lot of really cool stuff to just kind of like dig into.
And really, the
Uh,
reason why George Lucas is so insanely rich is because I don't know what company made it, but whoever thought of the idea to make a plastic lightsaber, George Lucas's bank account doubled.
oh yeah, easy, absolutely. The especially,
Dude,
I mean, like name a toy line that has not like a full on toy line, not
yeah.
like 'cause it's not the same toy, but name like a type of toy that has lasted nearly as long as the toy lightsaber. Like people spend hundreds
All
if not
right, hold on.
thousands of dollars on this stuff.
I didn't do research into this. Okay, I don't know. Like the only thing I can think of is like Nerf, maybe, but I don't even know how long that has been around.
Right, and like the core premise of Nerf is like you have the cool uh, uh, gun and it
Weapons
does
for
its
kids.
wep- but like the designs change and the IP changes, the advertising
Hmm.
changes. A lightsaber's a lightsaber's a lightsaber, man. Like
Oh yeah.
I if I go to Disney and I'm like, man, I want the one that Anakin had. Cool, that's the same one, and it may be the one that everyone has, but it does not diminish in any capacity how cool it is.
Yeah,
Like,
as a side note, like as I'm, starting to kind of build up some money, I've always wanted to build my own lightsaber. There's a website for that where you can literally sit down, not like buy like Qui-Gon Jinn or Anakin or Obi-Wan Kenobi's like lightsaber. I guess you could make that, but you just sit there and you literally design your own lightsaber to hang on a wall. Like you choose the color of it, you choose the design of it. I want to do that. It's like I think it's only like a couple $100, so it's not even that expensive. But like that's how much of a nerd I am, and it sucks that like sucks that like Ash doesn't like Star Wars. She just doesn't. She doesn't care for it. It's like the one sci-fi, one nerdy thing she does not care at all about. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna make a podcast with a coworker. And she's like, great, I support you. Don't talk to me. Talk to Ian.
and that's also fine too. I think I've had a hard time getting friends in the past into
Your Star
Star
Wars
Wars.
fix.
They look at it and they're like, I get it, and it's like, clearly you're not as excited as I am. So I don't know if you do. Let me explain to you why you should. But
Don't be that person.
I'm
No.
not. I'm not,
You gotta
I'm not
find you gotta find your own. You gotta find your
gotta-
own kind and then talk to them. And here we are,
Here we are.
Here we are.
So
Which I'm gonna start this off with my first little talking point right here,
yeah.
which I think is a very simple and easy one. If you existed in the Star Wars universe, and I'm gonna say Old Republic just as an easy kind of like generic sense
Sure,
because there's a
sure.
lot of like ambiguity there. Would you be, if you found out you were force sensitive, would you be a Jedi or would you be a Sith?
I think knowing who I am, I would be a Jedi.
Absolutely,
And
I agree with that.
that comes with the understanding that um, there's universe implications for how both of these organizations of force sensitive people work.
Mhm.
And statistically speaking, I think I would probably catch the attention of and be more inclined to align myself with Jedi than over Sith. I think that there's some gray lines that we can talk about at a later time,
Mhm.
and I think that we have examples of how a person can be force sensitive and participate in kind of both of these spheres without really being either. But for sake of old Republic style,
Yeah.
sake of like old canon extended universe, Jedi, definitely Jedi.
So it's actually kind of interesting that you say that, like especially with the ambiguity and kind of the blurred lines, because although I would like to think of myself as a Jedi, I probably would fall under the category of Sith, and only because if the Force existed and that I was Force sensitive to it, I would spend like my every waking moment studying it and like just learning more about it. And I would feel restricted by the Jedi's like moral code. I don't know if moral code's maybe like the right term for that, but like, and unfortunately, I fall a little, or I think too much about the Jedi Council and the New Republic when it comes to episodes like 1, 2, and 3, how they have almost a restricted view of the Force. You know, they don't let you explore the dark side or even the neutral side, the Bendu, because they believe that the light side is so pure. And I would want to just sit there and study all aspects of it. And I think that the Sith would lead me to more opportunities to do that instead of being restricted to just one out of possibly three, possibly infinite amounts of different versions of the Force that exist. And so I would want to be the Sith, and I would want to sit here and be able to explore the light side, the middle, the dark side, in any other form that I'm able to just basically get my hands on and to explore naturally. And so that's why.
Does that then imply that you would find yourself with a red lightsaber?
We will talk about that later. I don't know. That's actually a point that I have later on, because like even though red lightsabers are kind of like the standard, you know, Sith fucking I can't think of the word, standard issue color. There's actually kind of some history behind it and why specifically Sith lightsabers have a red lightsaber, and that's kind of really kind of interesting because it's not just bad, but there's history, there's context to it, which I find kind of interesting.
Well, obviously I ask because on the while we are starting on this subject of like lightsabers and where we would find ourselves, there's an important component, to every lightsaber, and that is the thing that grants it its color. Mm-hmm. You know, anybody listening, at least definitely the both of us,
the two people listening
are aware, right? The two people listening, my cats that are listening, are aware that like at every lightsaber's core there is this component of it that supposedly grants it its power, and there's a bunch of different places in like extended fiction and in like what I'm gonna delineate between extended fiction and like, you know, fan fiction as like the movie canon versus the extended fiction canon, but where that color comes from, and like knowing my temperament and understanding a little bit of where this color comes from, I think that like talking about what the kyber crystal or what the color granting core on the inside of a lightsaber does to impart its color to its force wielder. Like I know that if I were to be given a lightsaber, even if there weren't a Jedi and a Sith paradigm for me to like find myself on, I'm pretty confident that I know what kind of color would come out of that thing. Like knowing me, it is going to be green. It's going to be green. It's not even going to be my fault. I'm just going to pick it up and be like, nice, beam my feelings into it. And it's going to be like, cool, dude, guess who you are? And I'm going to get a green lightsaber. You know, and that's not like, there's some connotation there, right? I think a lot of the universe does a good job at showing different Force practitioners on the light side among the Jedi, using green lightsabers who are like known to be incredibly prominent. These people tend to be very introspective, and they tend to have a greater attunement to the Force and a respect for the Force in like a very stoic capacity. They're very wise people. Yeah, and I don't think of myself as wise, but I think as myself as like a temperament as one of these people, because I'm most certainly not a young Luke Skywalker. I'm most certainly not a young Anakin Skywalker. I am not so like bold and brazen. I'm maybe I was when I was 16. I don't know, but green for sure. And I feel like that because that gets so closely associated with Jedi that like, Bob's your uncle.
Yeah, like, so looking it up, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think you are definitely a green lightsaber kind of guy. But
Oh,
back
thank you.
in specifically the Old Republic, it actually kind of loses meaning later on in like the New Republic and the Jedi Council and the Jedi Order that we know of, and again 1, 2, and 3. Uh, Back in the day, a green lightsaber would indicate one of three branches a Jedi could kind of go through and train and practice. Specifically, it is the Jedi Counselor, who are people who are more diplomats of the Jedi Order, more ambassadors to other
Right.
governments, other I don't know, races, species, planets, whatever you can say. They are more in tune with what's called the living force, and you hear about specifically in a more notable green lightsaber wielder, Qui-Gon Jinn, who always talks about be mindful of the living force, be accept it, be aware of it, and basically let it do its thing. It is going to do its thing. You can't control it, you can't stop it, you can only be one with it, and you can only like imagine being like in a river. You can try to fucking swim upstream, but why put in all that effort, why put in all that you know uh, risk into tiring yourself out and drowning, or you let yourself be carried by the river and it takes you on its journey and you're there to experience it. And that, I think, wholeheartedly encompasses Qui-Gon Jinn. And if you even look at it, you look at other people like Yoda. So I think that, yes, while uh, the green lightsaber is more of people who reflect introspectively and who meditate for hours upon the force and what it means, and they do more about maybe not their intellectual side but their wisdom, their knowledge of the force. It's much more of a mental trait of someone to have a green lightsaber than it is maybe a physical trait. And I think it's really interesting the different sides that you see, like Qui-Gon Jinn, who is literally just like, I am a tool of the force, I do what I think it commands. Whereas you look at someone like Yoda, who just more sits and meditates and tries to predict the future, who tries to understand the force, but isn't quite one to be, one with the force as much as Qui-Gon Jinn.
Right. And like, I think obviously these two people have different objectives. I think that, as you've mentioned, because of how uh, this temperament shapes, right? This temperament shapes out. There's there's like something to be said. There's something to be said about how kyber crystal operates. So this thing, forgive me for not knowing the actual name of the planet that they were.
I believe it's
Uh,
Ilum.
is it
Ilum. Yeah, that's
Ilum?
well. There's actually like 4 or 5 different areas where Jedi will find crystals to
Yeah.
power the lightsaber, but the most commonly used one, especially for the Jedi Order, is Ilum, which I believe in one of the like 2003 Clone Wars, you see Luminara and her apprentice Barriss Offee create their
Right.
lightsaber, and that's like one of the first times in any type of media, especially on like either the gold screen or the silver screen, that you see a lightsaber constructed.
Right. 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 No, you're right. I remember that. In on in that episode, right? Like I remember, like the intention is to like showcase how the lightsaber is created and what the kyber crystal like is through that. The kyber crystal is this whole crystallized substance that has that resonates resonates a lot with like a tremendous amount of force energy, and because of the force as this like all permeating life energy that exists in all living things, resonates so greatly in this crystal. People who are force sensitive can attune themselves to this crystal. They can use it as a focus to sort of like connect to the force, as it is like an amplification device, and then as a response, it produces this energy, right? This energy field that reflects the person who's connecting to it. And so you have these people who like produce their own lightsabers and get their kyber crystal. They like make the delicate machinery that encapsulates the crystal itself, and the energy beam that comes out produces a hue, some color of some form. There's a lot of like extended, I think it just bears mentioning. There's a lot of extended universe lore about how the color of a lightsaber can be manufactured and can actually be granted because of the materials being used. So there's artificial colors, and there are other materials that can just be found and implanted into a lightsaber that give different colors. But in like the truest, the simplest, the like, as far as I know, OG form, I may be saying something salacious by suggesting that the original intended form of the color was like represented through a exclusively kyber crystal manufacturing process. I'm trying to like, I guess, cover my ass a little bit for like, because I know that once you get into like KOTOR and like the Old Republic, it
Yeah.
just, that gets like thrown way out the window. But like in this original capacity, it was reflective. It was reflective of the people who wielded them. And I think most notably, if I can tie this back into another reason why I think that I might be a Jedi, personally, and why I might find myself with a green lightsaber, is because of the journey of Luke Skywalker in the original movies, right? I'm obviously synthesizing a little bit of data here, but if you line up some of the games and some of the extended universe in the written lore, Luke Skywalker, as he shows up in the first movies, gets a lightsaber that is a different color than what he ends his trilogy of movies with, right?
Yeah.
He does, and so there's some secret behind the scenes reasons about why that is the case. I think we may have mentioned before about the difference between production reasons why things are the way they are in the Star Wars universe, and like lorified reasons. But Luke Skywalker starts with a blue lightsaber. He starts with his father's lightsaber, and he progresses through the series, and eventually he loses his lightsaber. And then when he comes back and we see him again all grown up and in his cool like black uniform. He's got a green lightsaber, right? There's like two implications that come out of this, and that is one, that like a person who is force sensitive but has not attuned to a lightsaber's kyber crystal can wield a lightsaber of a different color, and that lightsaber will retain its color. It does not immediately react to its wielder, right? And two, it implies that there is an amount of growth in this character that is Luke Skywalker. So right out the gate, he starts off as a Padawan, and he starts off young and ambitious and excited, and he's got the blue lightsaber from his father, which we can talk about the significance of here in a second.
Yeah, a little bit later.
And as he grows up, we find him with a green one that he had constructed himself. He had found his own kyber crystal at this point, and it's like an established thing. He found his own. He rebuilt his own lightsaber as a Jedi Master, and the color that came out of it as a newly graduated, full-fledged Luke Skywalker is green, right?
All right.
This transition. Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Before I start like just going
Before
off on
before you go on and you just fill a half an hour by yourself. So I did actually want to talk about it because it's amazing that you brought this up, because like I don't have to like force the segue into this. So I want to start off by saying that start off with the production reasons. So obviously George Lucas has a very narrow view. I don't want to say that it sounds a little harsh, but it is true. The narrow view on like good versus bad. You think Red, it's very harsh, it's very like strong, it's there, you notice it, and it's not always like it's very, very closely associated with hate and rage. And then you look at blue and you think more calm, you think more like the day sky. It's very calming, it's very just there, it's very level-headed, and that's where the original kind of concept of the lightsaber colors came from, where it's blue is good and red is bad. And he says that in some behind the scenes footage while he's filming. I think he's actually filming 1, 2, and 3, not even like 4, 5, and 6, but he has that thought in mind. And actually the reason why Luke Skywalker's lightsaber is colored green is not because of that growth. It's later kind of talked about as his growth, and kind of like extended universes explained why his growth, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. You see him transition from different colors, but really the actual reason why his lightsaber is green and not blue is because the first like third of the movie, or 20-30 minutes of it, is on Tatooine, which has a blue sky, and they wanted the comparison. They wanted his lightsaber to be easily recognizable and easily seen in the Tatooine sky, and blue on blue kind of blends in together, so they made it green.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still kind of. I kid you not. I looked this up and I'm like, that's kind of interesting. What the fuck, George Lucas? But but it's actually kind of interesting. When you look at it, that it is a different color because of a production. Because he thought cinematography, like cinematically, it was easier to see green on blue than it was to see blue on blue.
Right.
I agree. I absolutely fucking agree that I think his transition from blue to green, that specifically because he was using his father's lightsaber this entire time, which was blue, but because it was already a constructed lightsaber, that he wasn't able to imbue his own feelings into it, and it shows his progression as a character, that he wasn't trying to, for lack of a better word, force the Force to do something for him, that he actually wholeheartedly was more of a disciple of Yoda than he was, Ben Kenobi, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
But he wanted to study the Force and he wanted to carry it forward. That he, in my opinion, is the penultimate form of what a Jedi should be. And like a Jedi is actually like kind of an obscure term to describe what Luke Skywalker is supposed to be. He's supposed to be the pinnacle. I maybe have used penultimate wrong, but he's the pinnacle of what a Force sensitive creature should be. And unfortunately, not taking into account episodes 7, 8, 9, that he is one with the living Force. He lets it direct him on where to go, and he is just there to enjoy the ride, which I think is actually what Qui-Gon Jinn is supposed to is what he's trying to teach Jedi in 1, 2, and 3, and especially with Obi-Wan Kenobi, who I'm not going to get into that right now, but I think it speaks volumes as to why his lightsaber turned from when he created his own, it was green and not blue. But also that's the production side of things, but I think is something of note, but also something very interesting to say.
No, I mean, it is. And it is because this illustrates precisely the point behind delineating between what extended universe and like extended universe lore does to Star Wars the franchise, what like canon current movie universe lore does to the franchise, and then what the circumstances of the world around the universe that is just how they produce the thing, the production reasons that impact the universe. And I want to take this opportunity, right? I want to take this opportunity to segue a little bit, right? While we're talking about lightsabers, we're talking about their color. We're talking about the impact that lightsabers have on the narrative. And we're talking about all these things that have shown that there's an implication in so many different ways to how it impacts the universe. There's this integral story of lightsaber colors that I think you've provided me a list with of topics to talk about, and here at the very top of the list, one I think is important and one of my favorites to talk about.
And the fan favorite
is the purple lightsaber.
Yes.
Is absolutely. The purple lightsaber? Okay, so here we are. We've established, right? So we've established sometimes a lightsaber is a color because in production it just needs to be that way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in extended universe,
not even needs to be that way.
Sometimes, there's something about somebody's choice that is just an offhand dismissive, oh, you know what, this would be really cool if we just did this, that makes this thing that becomes this cool, evolves. It evolves into this really cool fan favorite aspect of the universe, that ends up creating this momentum behind it, that just everybody starts to accept. Maybe didn't have anything to do with the story at first, but is part of the story despite not having been made canon. This idea of the purple lightsaber, and in particular the most famous of purple lightsaber wielding Jedi masters, Mace Windu. Mm-hmm. The man, the myth, the legend himself.
Samuel L. Jackson, Nick Fury, and other roles like Jurassic Park. I don't know his name there.
He's one of my favorites to talk about because of how much the fan base like rallied together
Just don't.
around the concept of Mace Windu and he as a Jedi Master and he as a like the only movie shown purple lightsaber wielding Jedi Master.
I mean, movie shown. He's the only one. Like, not like again. This was when we're watching 1, 2, and 3 after knowing 4, 5, and 6, not counting Rey at the end of Rise of Skywalker. He's the only one that isn't the traditional 3 colors, which again is something to be said because you think, 4, 5, and 6. You look at Luke Skywalker, and you're like, oh shit, he's something special because he's green. Not knowing at the time, you don't know that Yoda had a green lightsaber as well. But you look at Luke Skywalker and you think, oh shit, he's got a different color. He is something special. And same thing with Mace Windu. You look at him and you're like, oh shit, he's got a unique color. There's something special about him.
Right, like imagine the impact. Imagine the impact of going years and years. You're a huge fan of this. You've got like all this swag. You got all this extended universe stuff. You're all super invested. This is like your hobby. You got your friends together. You just come around and hang out and BS. Birthday parties being thrown. Christmas specials being made, right? And then years later, Mace Windu shows up, and you see him whip out a lightsaber, and that lightsaber is purple. What is that gonna do? You're sitting here thinking to yourself, "Wow,
the fuck out."
There's another. How does this whole universe explodes? Right? Mace Windu is another one of these. Another one of these opportunities in the storyline in like the canon universe shown on movies, shown through the movies, of how production ends up influencing the concept of what the lightsabers become.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I fucking love this. So I want to say it because there's a behind the scenes footage of Samuel L. Jackson and George Lucas talking, and I think it's like him in. God, it's him in episode 1, I think, and I think he's in the Jedi Council and he's just kind of talking. And they're talking, and this is where George Lucas says that like he had a very kind of like it's very straightforward where it's like red and green equals the good guys, the Jedi. You look at red, you think it's bad, you think it's the Sith. And Darth Vader, and I guess, God, even at that point, did 4, 5, and 6 even talk about Sith? But anywho, that's a topic for another time. And Sam Jackson's like, well, what about purple? He goes, well, I don't know, no one's ever done it. But he's like, yeah. And George Lucas is like, yeah, but I guess we can make a purple for you. And he goes, yes, please. It's basically that's it. Sam Jackson's favorite color is purple, and that is the only reason. Right. I don't care what anyone else fucking says. That is the only reason why he's a purple lightsaber. Is because he was in this movie and he told the director, George Lucas, that I like purple. And George Lucas goes, you know what? You're a star. I'm going to give you what you want. Who gives a shit?
Right. So like, I'm a little behind you on this one. I agree that like that is canonically the reason why in reality as it stands, purple lightsabers exist. Samuel L. Jackson told production, hey dudes, I like purple. I want to stand out. There's a scene
I like purple
where a bunch of us are going to be together. This is my favorite color, and I want to make sure that I stand out. I have to be able to stand out here. Done. They did it. Boom. Guess what took off over there? Mace Windu gets his entire own style of combat and force wielding powers. All sorts of crazy stuff starts getting developed by the fan base. They start whipping it all out. They're like, well, it's a combination kind of how blue and red works, and maybe it's part of like his special attunement to the Force that it turned out to this weird hybridization.
You want to get into this? You want to fucking get into this now? All right.
I'm just saying. That's why we can stop it there. But that's why it is my favorite, because this little decision where an actor very reasonably was like, I want to do this thing. And then everybody was like, cool, we can make that happen, right? We have computers. We can do whatever we want. Boom. It was so cool. So anyway.
All right. If we make it in this podcast, absolutely we're going to be talking about that later. Because like I got
we have to come back
on that.
We have to come back to this.
We will absolutely come back to that. But so we talked about green, we talked about purple. We haven't talked about the quintessential color of the Jedi, of the lightsaber, blue. Like, again, don't fucking quote me on this. The most pure of the colors of the Jedi is blue, the blue lightsaber. In that significance, as we talked about, green is more for counselors. Back in the Old Republic, blue was more for guardians, people who use the Force to enhance their own physical attributes. They're more, for lack of a better word, aggressive. They're more about using the Force in a way of peacekeeping and fighting than they are about wisdom and learning about it. And they're not the scholars; they are the protectors. And so when you look at this, it's actually kind of interesting when you really dissect, especially with the Jedi Order and the prequels, who uses a blue lightsaber and who doesn't. And I think the most relevant one, obviously, is going to be Luke Skywalker. You know, in episode 2 and 3, he's got a blue lightsaber. He even constructs his... Hold on. Anakin Skywalker... Did I say Luke? Fuck. Anakin Skywalker
You're right.
uses...
I was like, go on.
It's a Skywalker. Who gives a shit? There's like 8 of them now. So... So he uses it, and you think of him as a very aggressive person. And he created his lightsaber like 2 or 3 times, all right? He created it once when we finally see him after 10 years of time lapse between episode 1 and 2. He's finally a Padawan. He's learned. He's almost at the point of basically being a master. He's got his own lightsaber, and it's blue. All right, and you think about it, in the Battle of Geonosis, he loses it, so he has to construct another one between episodes 2 and 3. It's still blue. It's still the same color. And even then, when we were talking about Luke Skywalker, it's still fucking blue. When it's handed down from Anakin that, I guess, some point in the Battle of Mustafar, Obi-Wan Kenobi picks it up, and he's like, this is mine now, and he walks off and goes off to Dantooine. And he gives it to Luke Skywalker. It's still blue. It's blue in episode 4 and 5. It's just fucking blue. And you think of Anakin, and especially when you watch like the Clone Wars like TV show, he's a very physical fighter, and especially because of like this lightsaber form he uses, he is very much an aggressive person. He uses the Force to fight his battles for him almost. But what I think is interesting, and I kind of want to like dissect into, Obi-Wan uses a blue lightsaber.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like in episode 2, I think he has a blue lightsaber, but like for some reason I always attribute green to Qui-Gon Jinn, but also to Obi-Wan, because when you learn about Obi-Wan's backstory, it's actually really freaking interesting, where he wasn't a prodigy, he wasn't something special, he was a guy who was like basically barely in tune with the Force, and he studied, he trained, he put his damnedest into becoming a Jedi. And I think he was in some like, this is where like I'm a little like not as keen on the details, but he was like on some like Padawan tournament about like who's the better like kind of Force wielder, and I think he got like second place. Like I don't think he won, but he got like second place or something like that. But like the effort he put into trying, where he was matched with people who were more naturally in tune with the Force, but he still fucking tried his damnedest. Qui-Gon Jinn took note of that, and he's like, I want this guy. Like, this is my Padawan. Like, this is a guy who actually cares, who actually is trying to learn, who's not just like, getting by on his natural talents. And like, I want to train this guy. And you think about Obi-Wan's progression, that he is kind of a little hard-headed and maybe not as strong in episode 1. Like, you don't really see him use the Force. You kind of see him kind of like be headlong as like almost the Anakin Skywalker to Obi-Wan. He is the Anakin Skywalker to Qui-Gon Jinn. He's the unruly Padawan who's just like, why can't we fight our way out? And Qui-Gon Jinn's like, be mindful of the living Force. And that's the message in the entire episode 1. Is he's like, be mindful of the living Force. Like, we are not here to force the Force to do what we want. We are here to be instruments of the Force. So I find it kind of interesting that even after all of that, and after he like fucking symbolizes and becomes the literal like, symbol of not only like the defensive style of lightsaber fighting Suitsu, but also he does his fucking best to be Qui-Gon Jinn to Anakin Skywalker, because he knew that he knew his master was trying to train and to teach the chosen one, that he himself wanted to do the same thing, but he still ends up with a blue lightsaber.
Right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So if we're talking right, like so here's a thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an implication here. Unless I'm mistaken, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. Obi-Wan, from episode 1 all the way through episode 3, when, spoilers, you see he and Anakin part ways.
Spoilers from like 13 years, 14, 15, 16 years ago.
I'm just saying. You see... Oh, sorry, he never loses his lightsaber, right? Like, it never gets destroyed.
And he loses it in episode 1. I will fucking correct you when you're wrong. Darth Maul kicks it down the hole, and he uses Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber to kill Darth Maul.
Okay, so then does he just happen to recreate a lightsaber that looks exactly like it between those two movies?
One would assume because if you look at like Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber, it is the same because he loses it. He might lose it in episode 2 in the Battle of Geonosis, but he's like in episode 3 he has the same lightsaber. So I think I think
There's-
Jedi create the lightsaber. Like this is where I'm like a little like iffy on it, but
Yeah.
like they create it because they think it feels best in their hand. You can use it as a weapon. They can use it as a tool. It feels best in their hand, and that's why they recreate it the same every time. Is because they're familiar with it. If they created a separate one, they'd have to learn the handle different every time, and I think that takes a toll on them. Whereas if they create something that feels natural to them and then keep recreating that from time after time, that's kind of like the easiest and like most efficient way to, make a lightsaber.
there's a lot of merit to that, right? Like
Yeah.
when I was younger and I was in college, I spent a little bit of time learning fencing, and I had a couple instructors who both had like different approaches to stuff, but one of them in particular um, was known for being he liked fencing, but he didn't like the idea of having to just like copy what everybody else had done because he didn't like the idea of fencing as like a static, unchanging martial art. He wanted to practice fencing to practice it as it was meant to be in his eyes, which was like a thing to use, like
Okay.
a style to use to fight with swords. And like
Interesting.
he would say very similar things. Like once you change, no matter how talented you are, something still feels a little off about holding somebody else's weapon. Like you can
Yeah.
get better at using weapons and applying that practice. But at the end of the day, it's like, oh well, it's not the it's like you go outside without your watch on after wearing it for like a year. You're like, oh, this feels a little weird. And that lack of like comfort can, it's
Really
like it's a
throw
small
you off.
psychological thing. But no. So you make a point. The point that I wanted to get at, the point that I was hinting at, is that like he Obi-Wan, for being somebody who progresses through the entire series with the same color lightsaber, it is interesting to see like how he is like a character grows and how his lightsaber doesn't
Mm-hmm.
change. I think that that's interesting because it implies that either Obi-Wan was always going to be himself and was never going to be able to be somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn, despite Obi-Wan in the end of his life when we see him in episode 4.
Yeah, he does in episode 4, but he is a ghost in 5 and 6.
I'm just saying, but when he does that, he like the kyber crystal at its core. What this implies throughout this canon, what these production based reasons for people just saying, oh well, it has to look consistent, otherwise people will be upset. The production reason behind this ends up implying that a kyber crystal attunes to a person once and
So,
doesn't change, even though you continually attune to it and use it. The blue persisting either means that he never changes a person despite becoming a force master, or that you only attune to it one time and it changes based on that one time.
yeah, and I
But
don't.
I'm kind of the opinion that it's the former, not the latter, because of how red lightsabers get made. Is this an opportunity? Do I detect an opportunity, or do we want to keep talking about
Okay.
blue? Because I think that blue has a lot to like continue to be.
Blue has, I think, the most to unpack, honestly, and that's why like we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this because I think yeah, I do find it interesting, but I also as far as like canon goes, and as I'm looking at things, like 99% of the time, the color of the crystal is either when you create your lightsaber, I think you talked about this a little bit earlier, where you find the kyber crystal that works for you, and actually only like I think like when I like did that math, only like a fourth of lightsabers in the New Republic are made of kyber crystals. Like it's really insane to think about. When you think about kyber crystals, you think Ilum, you think kyber crystals, you think like the natural fucking like lightsaber, what it's meant to be. But not all lightsabers are made that way. Like
Right.
like looking into in one of the deleted scenes of in one of the history and the lore of between four episodes 5 and 6 is how one of the most questions fucking asked between time skips in a series is how did Luke Skywalker make a lightsaber, and he actually used a forge at Obi-Wan Kenobi's house on Tatooine to craft his own lightsaber, and because the ways of the he wasn't able to travel to Ilum. He wasn't able to get a kyber crystal. He actually had a synthesized crystal made. He constructed it himself to create his own lightsaber, and that's actually how Sith create their own lightsabers. But we're going to talk about Sith in a minute. that I think is really just kind of fucking interesting. Where when it comes to selecting a kyber crystal to put in your lightsaber, almost all the lower points too, you find the crystal that resonates with you. You don't pour your heart and soul into it. You find one that resonates with you, and that determines your lightsaber from the get-go. So if you, when you're looking to craft a lightsaber and you're looking for a crystal, if you're going to use it more as a warrior, you'll be drawn more to blue crystals more than you'll be green or yellow. If you're going to be studying and a scholar, you're going to be drawn to green more so than blue than in yellow or other colors. So I actually think, and it's proven in, the movies, that it is at the time of the construction of the lightsaber that determines the color of the blade. Now there are some extended universe like lore, specifically I'm talking about Darth Revan, that changes that slightly. But what I want to talk about also is Anakin Skywalker. Episodes 2 and for most of 3, he has a blue lightsaber. At the end of episode 3, he is Darth Vader. He is not Anakin Skywalker anymore. And he uses a blue lightsaber.
Right.
So I don't think that the color of the lightsaber changes when you if you progress as a person, if you grow as a person, or if you even just implode as a person, when you become a Sith. I don't think that lightsaber changes. I think on the construction of it, and that's why, again, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, like how the Sith create their own lightsabers, because they're pouring all that hate and rage and fear and anger into their crystal at the time of their construction of the lightsaber. That's why it's that. And that's why it doesn't change over time. And that's why I think when you take the whole context of the prequels of the Clone Wars, why General Kenobi, that's why I say General Kenobi, is because he isn't a Jedi Knight. He is a general. He has spent over like fucking 10 years or not 10 years, hold on, that's 10 years between episode 1 and 2. He spent like 4 or 5 years as a general of the Galactic Republic. He has to use the Force to defend himself and to use it as a warrior, as a general, as a military officer in his like most fucking like progressive years as a person. Because you think of 1, he's a Padawan, he's barely made it to like the Jedi trials, and so of course between 1 and 2 he passes the Jedi trials, becomes a Jedi master, and he teaches Anakin Skywalker, but he's still immature. He is still kind of headstrong. He's still trying to embody Qui-Gon Jinn, but he's not quite there yet. And then the Clone Wars happens, and he's not able to fully complete his training to become basically a green lightsaber wielder. And so he has to use the Force to fight as a warrior, to become this general, and that's why he never progresses past blue. That is my theory, and I think it's fucking like how are you gonna argue against that? Like, he is stuck fighting a war that he didn't start, that he didn't want to be any part of.
Right. So yes, right. I can see that. I can see that it makes sense when you have this warrior idea, which, to be clear, not all Jedis have to progress from one to the next, right? Like this temperament,
yes,
thing that we're establishing, is that people attune to a kyber crystal, they find one that likes them, or they like pour their heart into it and it adopts this thing, whatever like the means established through different canons, is that the color of the lightsaber is developed. There's something to be said about like a theory where Obi-Wan starts off in this role that is traditionally associated as a more junior conception, a more like less cerebral conception of one's practice with the Force, right? And becoming stuck with it, because as he was young and in one of these in his like formative years, he kind of gets roped into the Clone Wars and is a general in the Clone Wars for a long time. And so is Anakin, maybe for a really long time, until some pretty nasty stuff happens where Anakin's dealing with a lot of really nasty stuff and can't quite figure out how to handle all these feelings.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I think that there's something to be said about the example, right? The symbolism of how a blue lightsaber represents a person's attunement to the Force, where the Force and them, their connection to it is much more physical. And so the way that they use it is as though it were like an extra limb. But in this case, instead of like an extra limb where you just pick up an object and move it, it's like your own personal abilities. You move, you faster, you jump faster, You like can react to things more quickly. You can throw stuff around, whatever, etc. Um, I mean, I think it stands. I think it stands as like a retroactive piece of evidence to argue about like what the blue lightsaber symbolizes when you start looking at people like Obi-Wan, right? To like
Yeah.
reinforce your point, when you look at Obi-Wan's history, it makes sense to think of a blue lightsaber as this kind of thing, no matter where it came from, but this kind of symbol of one's connection to the Force, because of who he is and because of who he remains throughout the entire series.
So
Um,
I do want to throw a disclaimer out.
yeah,
Obviously, like fucking 40, 50 minutes into this recording, this podcast, that all of what I've researched and what we're like talking about is mostly because we Jedi, the Kyber crystals, the Jedi lightsaber color had more meaning back in the Old Republic than they did the New Republic. So back at the time, like outside of Mace Windu, pretty much everyone inside the Jedi Order just kind of chooses what color works for them, and it even I think the production wise, it doesn't really matter all that much. It is in the olden days, back in my day, that the blue and the green and the yellow had specific paths of the Jedi laid out for them, and you knew, depending on the lightsaber color, who they were and what they meant. That meaning was lost over time. And so by the time we get to the episodes 1, 2, and 3, yeah, we can break it down. We can talk about it as much as we want. They don't mean as much as they're supposed to. And especially when we get to 4, 5, and 6, that like again, it's one of those things that like we can talk about all day. We can fill an entire fucking season of podcast worth of talking about the progression of character or what the meaning symbolism behind something is. But in the entirety of the thing, George Lucas went, I like blue and green. It means good guys.
mm-hmm.
So,
Yes. Right, like you can't ignore the fact that at the end
yeah.
of the day there was like production influence, and then everything else was kind of built out around that.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of how convincing the stuff that was built out around it was, like, there is production influence. There's so I wanna take this opportunity, right? So we've been talking for a little bit now about like what we're calling the core colors, and I know I mentioned the purple thing just to be like, hey, this is a really cool idea. To kind of rehash the point I was making there, the production reasons that we've just mentioned continue to influence the like extended universe and the movie canon, right?
Yeah.
There's an oft disagreed upon, and I think one of the more tumultuous sources of like canon. I think that most people would agree. Perhaps they would disagree. I'm okay with them disagreeing. Again, with sources, please. The red lightsaber and its origin, right? So you actually already
The
talked about
red lightsaber.
you
Yes.
kind of spoiled about this thing, but we're talking about the core, the premise of like this conversation is the core colors.
Yeah.
And we got blue, we got green, and red as bad guy. Red as bad guy is the symbol of bad guy. Comes from a really interesting series of different interactions between production and extended universe lore. I think more so than fan base lore. And so like, chime in as you see fit. I am 100% confident that red was specifically, way back in the day, chosen because red is bad guy, it's visually distinct, and it complemented the gray and dark color palette of the uniforms and of the set design of, or not complement, but it stood out against the set design of the bad guys, right? So like,
I mean,
all imperial opposites.
with the stark contrast of the solid black that was Darth Vader, when you fucking like in some of the newer media, like in Rogue One, where you see him like light a lightsaber and like it lights the entire fucking pitch black corridor, and you see the reflective like light on Darth Vader's like armor and uniform and shit. You fucking shit yourself, okay?
Right. Like, and that's the intention. The intention is definitely to be like, here is this thing that people are going to look at and be able to visually distinctively notice is this. Like, we as humans key in on things that are red because we've evolved eyeballs that key in on red. And this
that's color. Hold on, that's color theory, and we're not going to get into that. Okay, this is fucking Star Wars podcast.
What I'm saying is that red is this distinct thing. It's very different from green and blue. Everything that is bad guys in the Star Wars universe has the same general shapes, the same general color palette, without like a whole lot of, I should say, perhaps not color palette. They have their own distinct design, right? They use grays and they use dark, like metallic colors. They use black shiny colors that like catch light really well, but they make everything super muted and like kind of boring to look at. When red shows up, you're like, oh wow, that thing pops out. 100%.
Yeah.
That is the reason why we have red. But extended universe time, the red lightsaber. The red lightsaber.
The Red Lightsaber.
Way back when the Sith were first developing
Mm-hmm.
the technology of the red lightsaber, before the Order of the Sith and the Order of the Jedi started doing their open spats in like I think this is like pre-KOTOR, right? Pre-KOTOR, before the Sith became like a fully established thing.
Mm-hmm.
The extended universe lore behind this, to my knowledge, is that back in the day, a bunch of Jedi hanging around were like, man, Force is cool. Things are so cool. We love the Force.
Space.
Oh wow, look at all this stuff. Look at all this stuff we can do with it. We can do stuff like shoot lightning and like create life. What is this craziness? And then, probably said, hey, that's not cool. Well, lightsaber technology happened to be in development, and some timey-wimey, wishy-washy stuff happens for a little bit of time. And at some point, once we know that Jedi and Sith are distinct entities, Sith believe that the practice of the Force requires like a certain adherence to this code, Jedi doing the other code. A bunch of Sith got together and they're like, you know what? I know a thing or two about advanced quantum engineering and stuff. We can take a kyber crystal or some other synthetic material, and we can produce a type of lightsaber resonance frequency that happens to emit a certain color wavelength that has a 1 in 100 chance of passing through the lightsaber of our opponent. And these guys, they sat down, they're like, what? And they made it. They made this thing. They made a red lightsaber with the intention of it being a practical tool to fight other Jedi that they were fighting with. Back in the day, they didn't have red lightsabers. You wouldn't just go into a kyber crystal cave and then find a red crystal.
Yeah.
They found the crystals, they made their lightsaber, and then they did something to it that changed the lightsaber so that it could pass through the defenses of a Jedi.
Well, so this
that's how the Sith red lightsaber, like in extended universe canon, to my understanding, became a thing. Because then afterwards, when they discovered like synthetic materials, you could force the replication of something like that. You didn't need a rare kyber crystal to do so. It became standard for Sith to use it because of the ability to periodically break through the defenses of somebody who's like using the Force to predict your movements. Like if you can't beat them by force manipulating them, you could just cut through their defenses because they couldn't block your attack.
So I'm a little less well known about the origins of the red lightsaber, but as it's kind of like the collectively agreed upon origin of the red, or why red is the thing that happens, because not only did the Sith not have resources to go to Ilum, to go to these other planets that had kyber crystals naturally occurring, they had to create their own synthetic one, specifically, one that is well known, obviously, in Star Wars lore, is going to be Darth Maul, where Sidious literally forced him for like a week to be in this forge, to be in these like human melting temperatures to create his own synthetic red lightsaber that he had to use the Force specifically to keep him alive, and if he didn't, he would have died, and Sidious would have been like, oh well, next one. Like, the Sith are fucking brutal. And,
oh yeah.
You see this especially when it comes to the Clone Wars, and you think, in the TV show, when you look at Count Dooku, and he obeys his master, Darth Sidious, where he's like, hey, you've been training this Sith assassin, not a Sith Lord. The rule of two applies. I want you to kill your apprentice. I don't like this. I am not ready to be killed. You have not learned everything from me. You do not deserve a Sith Lord apprentice. I want you to kill your assassin. And so he attempts to do so. And so he appeases his master, obviously Darth Sidious, who still has the power to kill him, because he's stronger. Count Dooku has not surpassed Sidious's power. But in the end, tries to circumvent this kind of, he starts thinking like an actual Sith, and he goes, all right, I'm going to actually get an apprentice. I'm actually going to train him in the ways of the Force and actually overthrow and abide by the rule of two and kill Sidious and take his place and have a Sith Lord apprentice with Savage Opress.
Yeah.
And you see him train Savage. He sits there and he just like Force lightnings him, and just sits there and does it maliciously. And Savage is like, what the like, teach me how to defend this. And he goes, in time, but for now, you suffer. Like, in creating your own lightsaber, the entire philosophy of the Sith is literally pain and hate. Like, there is nothing else. And I think that is such a poor representation of the Sith as a whole, because I think that the Sith were a little more open-minded back in the Old Republic, but because of the rule of two, but because of what they became, they were forced to survive this way. And when you create your own lightsaber, it, again, as we've talked about, takes upon your intentions, your hopes, your aspirations, your mental state. When you're creating a lightsaber in that kind of environment, all you have is hate, pain, and agony. Like, what else is your kyber crystal, or even synthetic crystal, supposed to represent? That is your entire existence, is pain, hate, and suffering. And right. So red just appears, and there is no other color, because the Sith, by the rule of two, know no other life. They know no other existence. And I think that is just really sad, but also, like, speaks fucking, like, volumes about just the Sith as a whole and their whole teaching style versus, like, the Jedi.
I think, right, like, there is something to be said about the red lightsaber being the symbol of everything that a Jedi doesn't stand for, right? Mm-hmm. From the extended universe canon, about it being a means of survival, like a tool. Using the Force, and using specifically components of the Force that combat what had previously been established as, like, the common practice of how Jedi were doing things, right? Using synthetic strategies, like coming up with ways to get around other people's strengths by undermining them, like changing the game, right? Sneaky, tricksy, coercive, whatever nonsense. No matter how you look at it, there's this continuous thread of association with the Sith, with what you're saying, like hate and pain, and that, like where else does that? How else would that stand out in a universe where canonically it is explained that a lightsaber embodies what the wielder sees the world as, how the wielder experiences the world, then through, like, a vivid red, the Sith, mm-hmm. as the Sith as, like, a means of using a tool to fight off Jedi so that they can actually win, the Sith as a way of expressing and making them, like, visually distinct in a production capacity, the Sith as a philosophy. You know, the idea of the red lightsaber, it stands as a perfect representation of what the quote-unquote other is, right? I'm not going to call it the dark side, because I think that you're right in about how Sith are portrayed in a specific frame of the Star Wars universe's progress that makes them out to be just kind of like evil, short-sighted monsters, or schemers or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there's, like, even if it hadn't been then, like, it makes sense to me as like we've looked at, like, human culture, like civilization evolve. People develop strategies around their adversaries, and they develop this sense of how to conduct themselves when placed in adversarial situations, like the escalation of conflict in societies, and the perception of how one should impart their beliefs on others and whatever. Like, a red lightsaber is this, like, incredibly important and super varied side of the Force, of, like, the idea of the living energy that permeates all of the universe. You know, because it isn't just like these different. It doesn't just like stop at these little aspects where somebody can be a protective, like individually protective person or a individually contemplative person. It's it's like more than that, right? The red lightsaber to me represents the depth of the Star Wars universe as a possibility, um, because
Oh
like
yeah.
whether it is a kyber crystal or whether it is like somebody taking a normal kyber crystal like a blue or green one, and then channeling their hatred and their pain and their suffering into the crystal to make it red, you know, bleeding the lightsaber out, which is a thing that we can talk about when we get into some of the other colors that are a little bit more rare in the
Mm-hmm.
universe. Or if it's just a synthetic thing where some guy who's force sensitive is like, "Oh, I'm never going to win this fight, but I have to because otherwise this other guy's going to do it. So I'm going to build this tool that has this right. Like no matter what, it is still the depth. It is the other. It is the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
It's the like subterfuge of the expectation of how the force is a can be used as a system of order, um, and I think it shines light on the idea of like the force as this like benign neutral thing that does have more to it other than just being used as a system of order where it can just be something that is calm and serene like a soft undisturbed pool. It can be rain. It doesn't just have to be a storm. It can be snow,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be an ice cube with flavors in it. You
Is
know,
that a
like
snow cone?
it could be so many different things. Um,
So like I wholeheartedly agree, and I don't know, I don't think you've watched Star Wars Rebels yet, right? Like the
I haven't
TV
watched
show.
Rebels. I've watched everything else
Yeah.
except Rebels.
So Rebels introduces the new concept, and I think it's really interesting. And what they're talking about is the Bendu. So obviously the main premise as far as Jedi's go in Star Wars Rebels is that there is a Padawan who had survived Order 66 because his master sacrificed himself or their self. I don't know if it's the master was female or female. Sacrificed themselves to protect their Padawan, who was this character named Kanan Jarrus. And so Kanan Jarrus obviously survived, hiding his lightsaber, hiding his force abilities from the Empire, and just kind of lived every day to day. He was kind of like a smuggler esque that was like before the rebellion as a whole started. These like smaller rebel cells kind of like rejected the premise of the Empire and tried to fight back, and he was part of that. And he was like one of the only Jedi to do that. Of course, he comes across this force sensitive kid on his travels, and he goes, even though I am not technically mature enough or force sensitive enough, not force sensitive enough maybe, but like knowledgeable about the force to really train you, I recognize that you are a good guy. You reject the idea of the Empire and of basically what later he learns is the Sith, but I still will teach you in at least the ways that I know. Sorry, hold on, sorry, I completely
Yeah,
lost
yeah,
track of
no.
thought, but I there remembered. He comes across this creature. It's this giant like tortoise kind of creature that can speak the common tongue, and he calls himself the Bendu. And why Kanan Jarrus was brought, kind of attracted to this character or this creature was because it was the neutral force. This was a creature that was very, very much a force sensitive creature, but was neither the light side or the dark side. He was, I am completely neutral. And this was at a time where Kanan Jarrus actually, this little bit of a spoiler. I don't know if you wanted me to continue.
I mean, yeah, no, I'm gonna watch it anyway. But
Yeah.
like, feel free to spoil.
So Kanan Jarrus, I think a duel with like Darth Maul at this point, became blinded, and he had a struggle with like how is he supposed to continue his life? How is he supposed to like use the Force and teach this young Padawan to use the Force when he can't even like, you know, properly duel him and teach him how to do different like lightsaber forms. And the Bindu was like, you think with your like you see with your eyes, but that's not what you see with. You see with the Force. And he eventually taught him how to basically do what Luke does in Episode 4, which is to predict and to see and to react on the Force alone, than to rely on your eyes, which is again what Ben Kenobi taught
Yeah.
Luke Skywalker. And later on, of course, when the rebels need help, he calls upon the Bendu and is like, I need you to help me defeat these evil forces. And the Bendu is like, I am neutral. I am the Bendu. I will not be drawn into your war. Of course, he accidentally is, but whatever. So I think it's kind of interesting that, like, again, you think of the light, you think of the dark, but there is this neutral. There are other facets, and that's why at the beginning of this podcast, when I said there are possibly an infinite number of sides of the Force, only because in the, you know, the main media do we see light versus dark. Even in the side media, you see that there are. It's not a binary. It's not a yes or no. It is not absolute. Only Sith believe in absolutes, as Obi-Wan Kenobi would say.
Well,
it is
okay.
a fluid. It is a fluid thing, and
Right.
with that, however, with that, I will want to go on to experiencing, because we've talked about blue, we talked about green, we talked about red. We actually talked about a little bit of Mace Windu, but I want to get into a little bit more of purple, of the purple lightsaber, and how that comes about, and
my God,
other lightsaber colors. But I do need to take a break. I need to use the restroom, so I will be back.
Okay, let's
I'm
do it.
going to stop the recording. I'm going to come back, and I'll start the recording again, and I also need another drink.
Same. Break it is.